I'd like to go ahead and get the budget meeting underway. Okay, I'm going to call the meeting of the Budget Committee to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Carlos Graham.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome to the August 26th budget meeting. Emily, would you do the roll call, please?
Fitzwater.
Present.
Graham.
Present.
Hensley.
Present.
Hussey.
Present.
Kimna.
Here.
Mahalovich.
Here.
Prather.
Here.
Schreiber.
Present.
Ward. Wiseman.
Present.
Okay. I'd like to go ahead and start the budget meeting with any notes or updates from staff, from the Finance Department. Any notes or updates? Okay. From the Administrator, City Administrator, Steve?
No. I don't know if any of the departments have it.
I don't think you have it turned on, Steve.
Okay. And then I'll open up to any of the departments that had anything to open us up with. Okay. So I think our procedure tonight is to go ahead. It's about time to start resolving the parking lot and to vote those items in onto the parking lot, and there's offsets. If that's to everybody's pleasure, what we'll do is we'll take all the ones that haven't been voted. We'll take the one that is the proposed spend, and then it's offset as we go down the list. Is everybody clear with that? There's only one item that has already been voted on, is the lapse, and that's already been voted on. Okay? We'll start off with Councilman Hensley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I could, I would just like to say a couple brief things about the proposed offsets. I believe the items that are on the parking lot to be additional funded items, I believe, Mr. Chair, you moved the Chapter 353. You moved the Chapter 353 contract onto the parking lot.
I did.
And then I suggested the summer law clerk, the part-time prosecutor clerk, and the citywide internship program. And so far, we have found appropriation for about $21,000 of the citywide intern program. So there's about $530 left to be funded by other means. But just with respect to the line items in the proposed offsets, I went through the budget book and identified these as points in the mayor's proposed budget where we could budget closer to what's actually been spent over the last 3 years without really, hopefully, affecting too seriously essential services. Again, these proposed cuts would still result in funding that is within the range of what's actually been spent the last 3 years. And it's not because of any personal or philosophical problem that I or anyone else might have with any of these particular line items. It's just we have a tight budget, so we have to be extra careful and thoughtful about how we appropriate every single dollar in the FY 2020 budget, and it requires extra focus. So that's the entire reason that these particular items were highlighted, and that I brought them to the entire committee. I will say if we fully fund, or if we accept all of these changes, if we fully fund the items that are on the parking lot right now, the contract, the clerk positions, and the rest of the intern program, my intention would be to suggest that we move any additional approved cuts towards some of the police department priorities that Councilman Graham is leading. So with all that being said, I would just move that we begin discussions of these particular additional funded items and the suggested offsets. And I thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Yeah, Mayor Turgeon.
I have a question too about a couple of items on the parking lot, and I guess starting off too saying I did not add any of the pink sheet items in the mayor's approved budget, and of course now the parking lot process is adding things and taking some out and finding that balance with the priorities which you all are talking about now, and I appreciate that. But the reason I didn't fund any of those at the time was knowing that we have some, with some of the uncertainty with the tornado, and that's something that I still felt very cautious when I presented this budget to all of you. So I want to keeping in mind that there may be some things out there that we may have to do some upfront funding, and, I wish we could talk about a few of these things even maybe a little bit later in the year, but I know that the budget is due and we have to move that forward. But I'd rather feel more confident in some of that. But I do have a question, because one item was not in my budget because it came up after, but the item 2, or the PT prosecutor clerk, and I was at the admin meeting when that came forward. But a question on that specific position: does it have to be at that level, or I wasn't exactly clear on what the requirements are, but do we need somebody maybe that many hours? Could we reduce the hours and still meet kind of some of the minimum standards that would be required in that office, or do we have to start with that to a full 15,000?
Go ahead, Counselor.
I believe the 15,000 is based on 16 hours a week, which would include the full court day on Wednesdays and then an additional day in preparation. I'm not sure that the desired effect that the city prosecutor, the desired augmentation of her workforce would be that she desires would be achieved in anything less than 16 hours a week. I think that's probably a starting point, but as the specific number came from the city prosecutor herself, and is not my, that's not my number. So, but that does reflect, the budget number does reflect 16 hours a week.
Would that be something you could take back to her and have that conversation and ask if it could be done with any less to begin with and build up from there?
I certainly could.
Okay. Just a suggestion, and really it would be up to council, but I know it was something that kind of came after the fact, and so we're still learning about that particular item. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Council Lady Weissman.
Thank you. Mr. Molman, do you know if they're still having are they having one Friday a month court, or
No,
they're having?
The since former municipal judge Walker left in January, I believe there was an existing docket of Friday cases through mid-February. Once those were cleared, no new dockets were scheduled. I don't believe they've had a Friday court since February.
I don't see any further questions on that item. So let's go ahead and, well, actually start with the top of the parking lot. Do we need a proper motion in a second to work down through the parking lot?
I think that's the chair's pleasure. You can do it at the beginning or you can do it at the end.
Okay. I will say that we treated these parking lot items as like a nomination, but now that they're there, we have to vote, it seems to me, for the offsets. Now, as it turns out, the three, the clerk, the prosecutor, and are all funded by the offsets below, correct? I mean, the totality of all those offsets.
And then some, yes.
And then some. So, if we were to take up, just say, the summer law clerk, and then we look at those offsets, how is it that we're going to decide that we paid for that or not by the time we go down through that list. That, Council Lady Weissman.
I propose that we just approve line 1 through 5 through 18. Since we talked about those last time, and then we will talk about the last one separately. Oh, and 4, I'm sorry. I thought 4 and 5 canceled out. So basically 1.
Sorry. I propose we include 1 through 18, excluding line,
The chapter 353?
no, I was going to exclude up here the line 4, what we've already,
Okay.
isn't it line 4? Because we've already voted on line 4.
21,000, there's 530.
Okay, well, just 1 through 18 I think works. And we've already discussed the $21,000
Okay.
lapsed.
So I guess okay, so I will accept it as a motion and a second from Councilman Hensley.
I think I made the motion.
Yeah.
5 minutes ago, but, is there a second?
Yes.
Okay. So to clarify, I believe the motion is to take up items 1 through 18 with item 4 already been discussed. So the motion's properly made and seconded, therefore let's have discussion on that.
Can we get the numbers?
Excuse me?
Get the, I like to, what's the proposal as far as the expenses versus the income with the offsets? Is it equal?
Yeah, we're going to have to back out
That's what
those
I'm wanting to know.
items before we can,
Because you can't really make an uneven
Mr.
motion.
Chair, the proposed additional funding, including the $21,000 for the intern program, was $56,697. And the proposed offsets, which again includes the $21,000 in the blocked sweep, was $67,200. So there is just shy of an there's just shy of a $10,000, there's just over a $10,000 difference, where additional cuts exceed proposed additions.
okay. Councilman Prather.
I would propose that we narrow it down to offset by the money. We can't really pass something that's really not equal. They need to equal each other. You can't just pass it, with the deficit on the expense side. It's not going to work. We have to have offsets.
Councilman Hensley.
This isn't going to stop the process, and we have a couple $100,000 of additional items to discuss either tonight or next meeting, and I believe this is exactly how we did it last year.
It is not.
I proposed a slate of additional funded items last year and a slate of proposed offsets, and they were not even, and I believe we found additional uses for the resulting offsets that didn't have a...
Before it was passed. I didn't let it get voted on and pass until we had equal debits and credits together. It did not happen.
So you want to vote on each of these line items separately?
I don't care as long as they're equal. I mean, you can vote them all together if you want. And then the offsets, as long as it equals, the number's equal. I don't care how you do it, just as long as it equals.
Yeah, again, I have no ownership or particular interest in any of these offsets, but it's just a matter of how long we want to sit here.
Councilman Hussey.
I guess I'm a bit confused. What I'm hearing the motion being made is what, 66,000 roughly dollars in a reduction to expenses, and an additional 56,000, so that it's not as though this motion would put the budget in a deficit. If anything, if passed, it would add potentially $11,000.
Okay, I thought you were saying it was just the opposite. We had more
No.
expenses than credits.
Then I
Okay, that's
guess
what I was asking. I wanted the actual numbers.
And again, my second point would be that I mean, it's our prerogative as a committee as to what that final motion and how we vote on it, and so even if it entered us into a deficit of $11,000, the offset would be something like pulling from fund balance, and so.
Yeah, we chose that we would not go through the fund balance to pick up that money. We're trying not to do that, that's just not sound accounting principles.
I think we've operated with unwritten rules without formal policy.
I'm just saying that's not sound accounting principles.
Yeah, and I understand that, and if something came to a vote, then we all would have a say in that matter, but in this instance.
That's a very liberal look at it, yes.
I think last year we wound up cutting a few $100s more than we had used for, and that was just us spending.
So I would prefer at this time, I think, for a parking lot standpoint, is to pull off the items that hadn't been motioned, made, and seconded, and they'll have their opportunity to get back on there, the cars and the police officer. But for the purposes of knowing what we're voting on, it seems to me that the addition of those items or the subtraction, or just push them off to the right side so they're not a part of the addition.
The items that are highlighted right now, from the 5,167
Okay,
addition down to the negative 1,000 under PW operational supplies, all of those that are highlighted total a negative $25,203. So basically, there's $25,203 more cut from the expenditures than added with those items highlighted.
I thought it was supposed to be around 11.
It is. We didn't include line number 19.
Okay. I think, was the motion to include the 19? I didn't think so.
I did not.
Okay.
19,
Okay. So you had it correct. The motion was to 118, didn't include the 353. So right now it's at 25,000, right?
Can I make a motion to amend the item under consideration to add line number 19?
Okay. We have an amendment. Is that amendment or a restatement of the original motion?
Whatever you care to call it, sir.
Okay, since the original, I'm going to take the liberty as a chair and just call that a restatement of the motion. And so now 19 is included. And then now that you highlight that, what does it come out to be?
10,203 more cuts than added at this
Okay,
point.
$10,203.
$203.
Okay. I think it's time for us to debate some of these cuts, and if there's any departments here that sees that as those cuts as harmful, we're going to give the opportunity for the directors to say what might be the impact of those within the department. I do want to remind everybody that departments were asked to go through an exercise of 7% cuts prior to it entering on the budget. So some of these departments have cut 7% beginning. So I open the floor to any staff that would like to mention any item that's among the cuts. Counselor.
Thank you. So what I see is essentially is $5,167 plus $15,000. Those are my two pink sheets being funded partially through $6,400 of cuts in my own budget. This is a statement of priorities for me as department director for the office, for the law department, office of city council, counselor, sorry, and give myself a promotion. When prioritizing the summer law clerk in particular, with the dues and publications line item and the training and education line item, I am hesitant to give that my endorsement, and one of the main reasons why the 2019 budget was really kind of the first budget that I could call my own, that I think I had a good handle on. The 17 budget was not mine. I did not propose it. The 18 budget, I was learning what I was doing. The 19 budget was really the first time that I had a good handle on what we were doing, and I think that probably hews closer to what I would like that department to be able to do. And so if it's a matter of priorities, I would say that I would prefer not to sustain the cuts to my core budget in exchange for the summer law clerk. That is not to say that if going through the 2020 budget and it gets time to determine whether or not a summer law clerk is warranted, that I wouldn't look at savings that could happen that year and see if that is something that we could institute. Maybe even at a lesser level. The 5167 represents a 10-week internship. This summer we did a 8-week internship that seemed to work out pretty good. And so that could be funded at a lesser level. Essentially what I'm asking is, I would say don't make those cuts out of my core budget and allow me the freedom to determine if these budget numbers are where they need to be, and then proceed or not with a summer law clerk further into the budget year. I would like to recognize the city councilor training and education budget included an increase of $2,000 this year. That is because of increased interest in doing training for the city prosecutor. The former city prosecutor was not interested in the training that I had in mind for the city prosecutor. There are specific city prosecutor trainings available in the summer that are directly tailored to city prosecutors. I think there was a consistent scheduling problem for the former city prosecutor that I don't believe exists anymore, and so that is why $2,000 of additional training were included in my budget to do additional training. That is another person that would be served by that training budget. So that's kind of my case. Is a matter of internal priorities for me. I would think that it's my feeling that I would rather maintain my core budget proposed as opposed to getting the law clerk. And I do not want to foreclose the possibility that there may be savings within that core budget, and if that is found, we would look if we could fund the law clerk out of my own budget, which is not how we funded it this year. So I guess that's my pitch.
Okay, does any of the council want to take up that discussion, Councilman Hensley?
I just have a question for Councilor Molman. It's not on the screen right now, but your budget also includes a line for professional services.
Yes.
And 16 to 18 spend on those was roughly $24,000 to $36,000, and the budget for this year is for $9,000, which obviously is a fairly substantial difference. What sorts of things would fit into the professional services line item, and do you expect to need all $9,000 now for that? It seems like maybe there was a big shift in how certain things were done from one year to another.
So here I'm trying to get to this.
If you could, go ahead and give us the page number if you have.
No, I think I got it. Right. Well, no. For example, in FY18, there's 24,742. That included expenditures. That included a supplemental appropriation to do some administrative litigation in front of the PSC. Sorry, yeah, that was Mark Comley's law firm. Sorry. And so that budget started at, I believe, $5,000 and was raised to pay for a specific piece of litigation. So generally, what that budget item is there to do is to address my need for occasional special counsel. That can be either situations where the topic isn't familiar to me and I need to ask some outside attorneys. We had a situation, I believe it was this year, where we had to hire outside counsel because it was not appropriate for me to answer a legal question, so I hired an outside independent firm to answer the question. It was for a long time set at $5,000, and so I think that increased to $10,000. It essentially acts as a means to do kind of day-to-day legal work and address it as it comes up.
And regardless of where it started, the trend seems to be we wind up throughout the year needing considerable additional funding, normally,
Yeah, normally.
at least over the last few years.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Since the counselor brought up those items, is there any further discussion on those items that he was discussing, items 1, 5, 6, and 7? I would, okay, any, yeah, Council Lady Ward.
I'm sorry, I have a question regarding the PT clerk.
Yes.
Since if we hire that position, is it right to assume that one of your employees will be freed up for 2 days?
No.
No? Okay. So how is it being handled right now?
Generally, I would say that the work is not getting done. This isn't work that is going to transfer from one of my staff to the part-time clerk. I think the bulk of the work is work that currently is not getting done.
So she has no clerk
Or is
during the day?
getting done by the prosecutor herself in exchange for other tasks. Yes, she does not have a clerk during court days.
Okay, thank you.
Councilman Fitzwater.
My comment on it would be we hire professionals to give us advice. And he's asking to add $6,400 back in the budget, take $5,100 out, with a difference of about $1,300. We've got $10,000. So I would support making that transfer. I mean, I don't know how we accomplish that, but it seems like a reasonable request.
Do I hear a second?
I'll second that.
Okay. So we have an amendment to the main motion to eliminate items 1, 5, 6, and 7. I believe that's fairly accurate. Item 1, 5, 6, and 7, off the parking lot. Any discussion? Was it just?
I only addressed 6 and 7.
Okay, okay. Thanks for the clarification. 1?
The total is $6,400, which does include the city councilor office supplies. My main concern is regarding dues and publications.
So
I can't read that. 6 and 7.
The intent
which is $5,900.
So the intent of the maker of the motion was 6 and 7. Okay, so it's only 1, 6, and 7. We're in clear understanding of that. Okay. Any discussion? Any further discussion? Looks like we're ready to vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the motion to eliminate 1, 6, and 7, say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. Motion has it. Okay. Can you make that adjustment, please? Okay. Any further discussion on the motion to, the main motion now, as amended, for items 2, 3, 5, 8 through 18. Boy, I hope you followed all that. Okay, Margie.
Well, you had asked if there was any other department directors that wanted to speak on the line items.
Yes.
So the finance, training, and education, $3,000 cut. The 7% exercise that department directors were asked to do, this is basically where the bulk of my 7% cut came in. So I'd already cut this budget by $3,000. So this will be an additional $3,000 cut on top of what I had already proposed and as part of the mayor's approved budget. And it is lower, or it would be at the level of spending of 2018. But what I want to point out is that then that precludes me from going to any kind of national GFOA conferences, because in 2018, the national GFOA conference was in St. Louis. So that's why the spending up to this point hasn't been that great. But I'm required to have continuing professional education, as well as our purchasing agent, who is accredited as well. So I'm just saying that this is really going to cut us very, very close to sustain a $6,000 cut in one fiscal year.
Do you have a required number of credits you have to, training to receive to sustain?
That's correct, 40 hours a year.
Okay. And that's a part of the 40 hours? The
National GFOA Conference is a large part of that.
Okay. So that is, we're looking at item 8, right?
Correct.
Okay. What page on the budget book is that? Is that 66?
Page 66.
Okay. Any discussion?
So if
Councilman
we
Prather?
you didn't have that money, you would not be able to pay for your continuing education, basically.
I definitely would not be able to go to the GFOA conferences.
Okay.
We have Aaron.
Oh, Council Lady?
Just,
Weissman?
if we redid that math right now, looking at everything the way it is, we're still negative 9,470. We're close there, right? I'm trying to keep track. I'm just making sure that if we take it out, we're still not even close to.
Should still be positive.
Is it?
Yeah, because I think we'd be at like 6,000.
$9,470.
Yeah.
Any further discussion on item number 8, rather?
I'll make a motion to remove it.
Okay. We have a motion made and seconded to eliminate item number 8 from the main motion. Any discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor of this amendment, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Nay? Okay, ayes have it. Eliminate number 8 off of the item. So far, Mr. Sanders and then Chief.
Thank you. I just want to comment on the training for the Building Regulations Department. Right now, we have 3 building inspectors. They are classified as Building Inspector 1. We have a Building Inspector 2 position, which requires certifications in 4 areas. Right now, all of our inspectors do not have those 4 areas. They're diverse: commercial, residential, plumbing, electrical. And the goal is, in the past, you see the numbers increasing from 2017 to 2018. In 2019, approved budget was $7,000. We upped that originally to $9,500, brought it back down to $8,000. With this cut, it'd bring it down to $5,000. What we're trying to do is get multidiscipline inspectors. And these certifications are normally out of state, so we do have to travel to go. So I just want to understood that we are trying to build depth in our building inspectors with multidiscipline inspectors, which the requirement in the job duty is, or job requirements is for different certifications, and that's what that money's used for.
Okay, any further discussion or clarification needed? Councilman Fitzwater.
Does the requirements in the aftermath of the tornado enhance those needs to add that extra training?
I wish I could say for sure, but I can't. Right now, it's a manpower thing. We are catching more mechanical issues with, let's say, gas exhaust vents being covered up during roofing and things like that. So if the inspectors were more versed in mechanical, which we have adopted, they certainly could catch more things. But the tornado has enlightened us to some of the building issues that are out there now that we are doing roof permittings and inspections.
Any further discussion? Is there a way that can be enlarged just a little bit? The parking lot,
I don't think it can, Garrett.
It's hard to read on the screen.
and I'm trying to find the total where we're at right now. Is it, there's a 20,000 in the upper right, is that what it is?
Now, the upper right, that 295,709 includes the 6 police vehicles, police officer.
Okay, so then, could you provide me the
I don't think so.
total? Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, I promised, if there are no further discussion, Chief Schrader.
I understand, well, first I want to discuss briefly the animal control building and grounds, and I understand you can have good years and bad years. We've had some bad years, and that's a concern because of it. We're minus $16,980 this year in that line item due to unexpected expenses. So if we exclude that as just having a bad year, the last 3 years, 16 through 18, we averaged $19,229 in expenditures in that line item. So I just want to point out that historic spending is closer to $20,000 than this year's funding at $12,000. So that becomes a concern. You know, we'd like to have a good year and not have unexpected expenses or routine expenses, but that's what's happened the last 4 years.
Any follow-up with the chief? Councilman Graham.
Yes, thank you, Chief, for that information. Last year, didn't we have to replace the air conditioning in the building?
Yeah,
last year?
The HVAC, well, we've had a lot of problems with the building. It's only 7 years old, but it's just caused us problems since we've assumed responsibility for it, and that is one of the major expenses. Yes.
And I understand now that there's some other issues that's possible in the building as well, too.
Yes.
To the form of mold.
Yes. We're not sure it is mold. It's certainly dirt issues, and we've had to have some studies completed, and that's cost us some money also. Yes.
So I would support removing that from there.
Council Lady Weissman.
Do we have a fund for animal control for seizures that we can use?
Yeah, there is a restricted fund, and this, the amount that's in it at the end of FY18 for the animal shelter is $69,597. And that's basically from people that have donated money with the provision that it be for the animal shelter. So that is why it's in restricted funds. So it can only be used for that purpose.
Continue.
So if we have issues with mold, can we use that fund to fix whatever mold problem there might be?
There could be a supplemental out of that restricted fund, yes.
Well, I would add that we want to be sensitive to the reasons that people donate to that fund. So I would prefer to talk to the people responsible, some of like Friends of the Animal Shelter, those groups that generate that money. Certainly we know it's there, but sometimes they have other intentions, other purposes they have in mind. That's all I want to point out.
Councilman Graham.
One other piece to add up with that, with Councilman Wiseman point, didn't we increase the adoption fees for animals for this upcoming year?
It's included in revenues already, yes.
And how much did we predict that would be?
About $43,000.
Could that be earmarked for the animal control?
It is in our FY20 general fund revenue line.
But instead of going into this big bowl where all the money's going to go, could we just earmark it for the animal control building, and then we just use this $6,000 that we need? Because right now it's going to go back into the black hole, I call it, general revenue. We can just earmark it to go to animal control.
Then we would have a reduction of $43,000 in our revenue budget.
I wouldn't say the entire 43, but at least the 6,000.
Then you need an offset, is that right?
We need an offset, yes.
I think it's already included in the balanced budget proposed, as I understand that. Council Lady Ward.
Do we know how much is in that fund that Councilwoman Wiseman just asked about? The donation to, did you, 60? Is that what?
69,000.
I'm sorry,
At the end of FY18, it was $69,597.
And what is generally paid out of that? Has there been anything, you know?
It hasn't been used in a while. I'd have to get the history on it. That's what is remaining at the end of FY18. There's been nothing spent out of it in FY19. Yeah, we'd have to look at the history, but Sheila thought maybe it might have been used during the building process.
Because, I mean, I don't want to speak on behalf of anyone, but I would think a healthy environment for not only the animal caretakers, the animal staff, and the animals themselves would be a worthy thing for that money to go to. But that's just my...
What, procedural-wise, say this, we have a need for $6,000 for something. Would we have to, as a council, make a supplemental using that specific fund?
Being able to spend out of that restricted fund, yes.
With a special, okay. This is to Steve. You know, we've been talking about a sinking fund, and you had $300,000 in that, and it went to very little for this proposed budget. But would the sinking fund, if it were added to accumulate, my understanding is that could be used for HVAC and building repairs and a lot of things, not just that are in any department. How would you propose using that sinking fund should that have been funded?
Well, we do have some, balance in that fund. We calculated different expenditures that we anticipated for various facilities over a period of time. So to be those things, roof and HVAC and things like that. So, and we've got an engineering report that's been done on the animal shelter, and Roger and I have been talking about that, and he's doing a little more investigation on some things. So once we get that solution figured out, I would come back to council. My suggestion, come back to council and make sure we have some suggestions on how that could be used. The building fund could be used for that, and then there's some other sources as well.
Okay, thank you. And the avenue for using that fund is a matter of an internal decision, or is that a supplemental as well?
No, that's internal right now since it's budgeted.
Okay, very good. Councilman Fitzwater.
I would make my same comment. I defer to the professionals that give us advice on what we need in this budget. I am uncomfortable using funds, though, to pay for something that's going to be an ongoing, I mean, if it's in the budget next year, we're going to have to find out how to pay for it next year. I'm not opposed to looking for other money within our budget to pay for it if he says we need it, but I don't like using one-time money if it's, you know, if it's that important this year, it's going to be that important next year, and then we're going to have to look for money next year. So I would support if he is adamant that that's something that's important for us, but a good councilman has found dollars within the budget. I'm guessing there's other dollars, and if we say this is a priority, I'd rather fund next year's projects with next year's money and not dip into our funds if we don't have to do that.
Any questions here? Any follow-up, Chief?
No, if we could delay the decision so we could talk to some people that are part of those donations, I would feel more comfortable. I'm not arguing against it. I just would like to at least bring them, embrace them into, you know, kind of why they have the money there, why they donated it, that type of thing.
Councilor Mullman.
I certainly don't discount the chief's inclination to do so. I feel compared to council that it is questionable public policy and fiscal policy to receive donations and then after you receive it and let it sit for a number of years, then ask the people who donate it how you're supposed to spend it. I believe that when a donation is received for something like the animal shelter, and it's not specifically for something like buy food or buy vaccinations or spay and neuter or something specific like that, that it's designated when the gift is given, that there is a trust that we're giving you this money and we are trusting you to expend it in appropriate means. And so I certainly respect what the chief is saying, but at the same time, it is a very questionable practice to receive money and then several years later saying, how do you want us to spend this, after you've already, to reopen yourselves to spending limitations that did not exist at the time of the gift. You know, we want to encourage charitable giving. The animal shelter is a worthwhile thing to give to, but I think there should be a recognition that when people give to the animal shelter, that they trust that the police department and the city council will expend that in a prudent manner consistent with the wishes of the gift without having to go back and say, is this an okay expenditure of this gift? It's a position that I do not like putting ourselves in, where we are de facto going back and saying, do you want to add any new restrictions to this money? It's opening yourselves to essentially gift restrictions, legal gift restrictions, which weren't present at the time of the gift.
Chief Schrader.
Yeah, let me state it a different way. I think sitting here tonight, I don't know what parameters may have been established. So what I'm saying is not, do I have your permission, but rather I'd like to do a little research, maybe some discussions, and say, were there parameters established? Was there reasons that certain money was donated? It took a while to generate that kind of money, so I just think it's wise to at least explore that, because there may be some restrictions placed on it over the years, and I'm not aware of it, and I just feel like we should at least reach out and say, were there, or talk to people that may know whether or not there was.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Hensley.
I think I'd just point out, we're not, I don't think anyway, we're not talking about how to specifically spend the money that's sitting in there right now, right? We're talking hypothetically about how to offset it if in the future you come to zero and you still need more money in that line item, right? So I think we're not quite having two different discussions, but maybe 1.5 discussions right now. So I think the question about this $6,000 reduction in the animal control building and grounds is what's on the table right now and how potentially to spend the money that's sitting in that $69,000 account is probably not one for tonight, if I understand what's happening here correctly. Thank you.
Good, thanks for the clarification. I think that was important. Any discussion on the left? Any discussion on the right? Staff, any comments? Chief Schofield, did you have your hand up?
I just wanted to real briefly talk about the cut to, I think it's dues and publications up there. And our expenses to date for 2019 are $3,400. So we were a little bit higher this year, and we just see a trend in a lot of those professional affiliation dues. We also have access, we need access to certain research tools for code requirements and building code, fire code, that kind of stuff. And, you know, we share those accounts, those logins now. We do our best to share them amongst multiple personnel. And so we've been kind of lean in this for quite some time, and some of the providers have told us that we really can't do that anymore, especially in terms of accessing some of that material. So that's the reason there was an increase, a proposed increase this year, was to try to make that a little more legitimate and then also allow more folks to have access when they needed it, not sharing logins and passwords and stuff like that. So, you know, we'll certainly live within our means, and I know it's a small cut, but just to let you know that it was a justified and legitimate increase in this next budget year. So,
okay, thank you. And that's item 14 on our list, I think. Oh, yeah, that's why she didn't delete those lines, because we would all be screwed up on our lines. Let's see. 14, dues for $1,000. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay. It's
Yes.
Councilman Kemna?
You can make the cuts less, like animal control, buildings and ground, and we cut that to 2,000. Bring it around, I think we're still looking for 500 for the income share program, still, right? And make that even out?
That's included in that 6,470 that we still have more cuts than funding.
So if that's your desire, you could put that in the form of a motion that you could reduce it by a set amount as opposed to the full amount that, yeah, we can. Okay. So who's got the math right now? Is it $6,000? That's what I had, okay. 6,470 is, okay. Any further discussion? Left? Right? Yeah. Okay. I think that I don't see anything from staff. I think we're prepared to vote on the proposal, which is on the board right now. It includes what you see there, except for lines 20, 6 police vehicles, and line 21, 1 police officer, correct? That's correct, right? Okay. I think we're going to do this roll call. This is a fairly large vote. So roll call, please.
And this is for items 2, 3, 5, and 9 through 18.
That is correct.
Okay. Fitzwater.
Aye.
Graham.
Aye.
Hensley.
Aye.
Hussey.
Aye.
Kemna.
Aye.
Mahalovich.
Aye.
Prather.
Aye.
Schreiber.
Aye.
Ward.
Aye.
Wiseman.
Aye.
Motion passes. Okay. So we have ourselves the start of a parking lot and some good changes. I think that moves us to 6 police vehicles to be taken up. Okay, any discussion on the 6 police vehicles? We do not have an offset currently for those, which is totaling $243,780. Councilman Graham.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilman Shriver and I had an opportunity to speak with Chief Schrader, and thank you for that great conversation last Friday, Chief Schrader, in regards to the request for the original 13 police cars, and knowing the tight budget in which we have, knowing that 13 may not be realized in this upcoming year. I did talk to Chief about possibly funding 4 of those and then trying to find some additional funds for 2 other vehicles. After talking to some of the council members, I guess that wasn't a wise idea how we came up with the additional 2 vehicles. So at this point, I'm just going to ask that the 6 police vehicles come from sales tax G, in which we have also purchased fire trucks and vehicles out of as well. So the offset would be to come out of sales tax G under the police line item. So that's it.
Okay.
I'll second that.
There's a motion made and seconded to have the offset for the police vehicles to go to sales tax G. Is there a line item in sales tax G that we need to focus on, or we know what it is? Or does it matter? That's a part of the motion. Okay, very good. Any discussion? Yes, Margie?
So, are you referring to page 333?
Yes.
So is there a particular line? There are about 4 or 5 lines that were related to the police.
I just looked at the one that says police renovation and upgrade, so
Okay.
that's the one I was looking at, the $300,000. But if we can pull them from different ones, it.
Okay. We're going to add that as a friendly part of the motion?
Yes.
Okay. That is on page, what is the account number?
Page 333, there is a line item entitled Police Renovation and Upgrades that has proposed funding of $300,000 for fiscal year '20.
Okay. You have that? Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, any discussion on that item? 6 vehicles with offset of sales tax G. Seeing no discussion, Councilman.
Well, I guess I'm curious. We budgeted $300,000 in sales tax G and police renovation and upgrades. If we're going to spend $243,000 on police vehicles, what are we not funding now? I mean, if we budgeted 300, there was probably some intention, right? I'm sorry if I'm missing.
Yeah, Chief, go ahead and respond.
I discussed this with Councilman Graham and Councilman Schreiber. Our concern beyond this year is that it's an easy target. I mean, I can understand why you would utilize it this year, and it is our priority. But other things, I have a list of about 50 items that are on our sales tax G list. If one excludes the pink sheet requests and the $7.7 million in building upgrades and adding another story to our 40-year-old building, we still have $1.1 million in identified needs. So beyond this year, I mean, that's our only resource for those items. And I can provide those. I'm not prepared tonight, but there's a number attached to each one of those, I think 49 different things. And so if one adds that up, and I'm rounding to make it simple, but it's approximately $1.1 million, and we would have, that's assuming we spent the $1.4 million that remains in sales tax G. So we have the pink sheets, we have $1.4 million that will be expended through April of 2022, and then we have our building upgrades. In addition to those things, we have the $1.1 million in designated needs. So it kind of, we kind of return to the growing list of needs, and we delay, and, you know, it continues to grow. So I'm certainly supportive of the purchase of the vehicles, but there are a lot of things coming down the pike.
And I believe last meeting, we had a conversation about vehicles, and I had inquired about like a spreadsheet of the fleet to give me a better indication as to what they are. Do we have any progress on that in terms of it being distributed to council?
Yes, I could provide both the list of sales tax G needs and then the schedule of vehicles. We haven't refined it, but I have it, and if 6 vehicles are purchased and 15 are requested next year, Beth tells me those 15 vehicles will average 140,685 miles. So really, oddly, coincidentally, almost identical to this year's 13 vehicles. Next year we'll add 2 more, and they will still average almost 141,000 miles each. And our estimates have been pretty close.
I guess my concern a little bit is just prioritization of needs here. That if the authority exists within the capital improvement sales tax to fund vehicle replacements, then can that just be done through that process without the need to come to the council? And then those other items that were intended to be funded out of capital improvement sales tax should be pink sheet items. That it feels like from where I sit that the items that were intended to be funded out of capital improvement sales tax funds this year to that $300,000 line item were determined to potentially be a higher priority than the vehicles, or were cramming vehicles into a line item that it's not intended for. I don't know if I'm being clear on that, but it just, I guess before I knock out almost $250,000 of spending in that particular line item, it seems to me that there was something designated for those funds. And it would be good to know what exactly we're now putting off by not spending them. Like, I know it's 6 vehicles, but if we don't spend $250,000 on police renovation and upgrades, what am I putting off? Because those were going to be spent in 2020.
You've got a good question there, I believe, and there's somewhat of a practical sense. When we go to the voters every 5 years, in 2017, we offered this up in the newspaper, vote yes. And so the language, I think, directs us somewhat to the expenditure of those sales tax G funds. Matter of fact, I would never stray from them. Under police, 5 million, 20%, public safety, 5 million, 20% fire and police has field equipment, building renovations and upgrades, emergency sirens. I think the emergency sirens have been purchased, I believe, I'm not sure. It says what public safety projects were funded by the sales tax, what were funded. It says the police department received funding for equipment replacement, upgrades, as well as funding for an emergency response vehicle. So the proposition here, the verbiage is the police department will receive funding for station renovations and improvements, upgrades, and improvements to the 911 and emergency operations center. It will also be used for vehicle and personal safety equipment replacement and upgrades. So it's within the scope of what I recognize your argument, but is clearly within the scope of what we told voters we would do.
I'm not questioning that it's within the scope. I guess my question is, we don't necessarily have a whole lot of say as a council over what specifically those dollars are spent on sales tax G until the contract for an item's brought to us, right? Right now, we kind of budget line items and we budget specific general revenue dollars. So that $300,000 in that particular line item, For those dollars to be spent, what action would need to be taken other than just passage of this budget for particular items within there? Or is that strictly at the discretion of staff at that point to make that determination? Is that a fair? So for example, if we just didn't add these particular police vehicles, if we didn't pass this motion, does staff have the authority through sales tax G and a $300,000 line item to already purchase the vehicles?
From a practical, technical level, no. Execution of contracts over $25,000 requires council approval, but that does come at the contract approval level.
So what could happen here is that we don't do anything with this motion, and then when it comes time to expend dollars out of that particular line item, the contract is brought forth to us to spend it on police vehicles, right? What we're doing right now is directing what we want staff to do with that $300,000, as opposed to leaving that kind of open to some discretion.
Oh, excuse me.
Yes. Council had a discussion, very lengthy discussions about sales tax G, what should be in and out, and all of those kinds of things. I don't remember specifically which items you identified right now. I mean, I've got it, we can certainly get that, but my thought is it's up to council to say what the priorities are in sales tax G. And then obviously there's the technical piece when we get out and we bid it and we bring it to you and you approve the contract and all those kinds of things.
But if I follow up on that, just to hold the floor for a little bit longer, but we don't do that. Had Councilman Graham not made this motion tonight and we did not do anything in the police cars, we weren't going to discuss how to spend that $300,000 in that line item.
Well, I don't know what that discussion was about. I can tell you that several times I have suggested sales tax G as an appropriate opportunity for purchase of vehicles, in addition to some others that were in the letter that the mayor did, leasing being one of those, and you want to go into debt, we can go into debt on different things like that. So I think sales tax G was a discussion that was had, and whatever those projects were, you all decided that those were the projects based on that conversation. Now, the world may have changed a little bit since then, and we can go back and revisit how we got to that point. But I do think it's a council decision then as it is now.
So can I put you on the spot for a second? Do you feel like, as city administrator, you have the authority to spend sales tax G dollars on vehicle replacements?
I don't without coming to council.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Council Lady Weissman.
Do we have a drug forfeiture fund that we can draw from, or some other federally, I guess, seized funds that we have that we can use for police cars?
Councilman Wiseman, that was my next venture. But I don't know if you want to go there right now or not, but that's my next venture.
Okay. Chief?
One has to read the federal regulations and the parameters within which those funds grow and how they're to be expended and on whose authority they can be expended. For instance, one can't use those funds for personnel. Most of the time they're for equipment. Sometimes it's kind of an ambiguous definition of what that equipment is. We have to be careful every time we expend something out of those, for instance, equitable sharing fund, which is a federally authorized fund. It's very clear in the regulations that a governing body cannot dictate to a law enforcement agency how those funds will be expended. I just read it just now at Beth's insistence. So it's pretty clear that that's strictly a law enforcement decision. I don't know why, but to me, I think there's no other way to interpret the regulations.
Council Lady.
So how much do we have in that fund, or I guess how much is in that fund, and how long do we have to spend it?
Chief?
169.
I've got the number that is at the end of fiscal year 18, from our audit, from our CAFR, and the amount that's in the restricted fund for police drug forfeiture is $116,266.
And it earns interest, so that
Correct.
changes from year to year. And in fact, month to month, if the courts award us additional money, then that will deviate. We try not to expend from it. We want it to be available to us for emergencies.
What are the federal guidelines with regard to spending? Like, how much time do we get? For instance, we potentially missed the boat with one of our properties and demolishing it because we waited too long. Or potentially not, because we just didn't get a decision. And sometimes we miss out on federal grants or other federal monies because we don't spend the money in time or get applications in time. And so I would just be curious what the time frame is that we have to spend this money, because I doubt it's, well.
I'm not aware of any term that would dictate that. I think it's kind of a carryover. In fact, that's why it continues to grow, because it can be carried over. I don't believe there's a limitation or a term established.
I've reviewed Department of Treasury regulations that suggest that those funds should be spent as received and generally no more than 2 years.
Okay.
How long have we had those funds?
Well, I don't know if the Department of Treasury applies to what we're looking at. I don't know.
It does.
Question now.
Councilman Graham.
So I wanted to make sure that I understood you, Chief. So we cannot use any of this funds to fund a police officer. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, what about a police dog?
Well, we have to research it more than.
Can you research that for me? Because I think we're needing one.
Yes.
So if you could research that for me. And I know we have a meeting on Thursday with public safety, and you were going to, well, I know there's a motion on the floor, I'm sorry.
There is a motion on the table. Councilman Hussey.
I have a question about another pink sheet item, but it's related because in my mind it deals with vehicles and maintenance of the fleet. And so I'm curious, we talk about 6 vehicles and 15 here that are high mileage, and this is for Mr. Marash, just to wake you up again. Page 231 is a pink sheet item about replacing a vehicle maintenance lift. And I'm just curious, in the context of a conversation about an aging fleet, this one stuck out to me because it seems as though it's a safety issue. And central maintenance is the is our division that addresses the police fleet as well, right?
Correct.
And so we talk about an aging fleet. How big of a safety issue is our current lift in this regard? And are we putting your staff at risk when they work on whatever vehicle on this particular lift?
Yeah, in this particular item, we're actually trying to cash flow some items, and we're still working on that to try to get this replaced, because it is a safety item, and I'm not fully prepared to discuss all that because I haven't got there yet, but yeah, it's a safety item, and we wanted to get that replaced, but I think we can, as I think Steve said a lot, the budget's basically a exercise in cash flow for department directors, and including these things on the board. We, like I said, I didn't say anything a while ago, but I've already had the 7% cut throughout the budgets. I tried to hit every budget with a 7% cut somewhere. But as we go through the year, I'm going to have to make a bunch of transfers. I do it every year anyway, because sometimes, best laid plans, you have to move money here. Priorities ebb and flow each year, so we'll just do the best we can. And if we come down to the end and need a supplemental, I'm never shy about asking about that.
So just so I'm clear, on this particular item, your intention is to work with existing cash flows and take care of this?
Yeah, we hope to, because it's something that needs taken care of. Right now, the lift, I told the guys they can't use it except on certain cases.
Okay.
Basically, what's wrong with it, it doesn't, you can't, it either has to be all the way up, so it locks, but then you can't change the tire unless you're on a ladder, so, that whole facility's aging, so we're working to get that replaced.
Okay, I appreciate that, because if we're going to talk about a fleet, and we're going to prolong replacement, I think it's important to make sure that we have adequate resources and equipment to actually take care of the fleet. So, thank you.
Sure.
Any further discussion on, Mayor Turgeon?
Thank you, and I did, as Mr. Kroll mentioned, I did mention in the letter, the budget letter, about the possibility to consider using a portion of sales tax for vehicle, and it gives an example of police as well in the budget letter. I did not mention leasing in the letter, but just correction, not a correction, but I did mention, I do think that is a good thing for council to consider, which is what you have on the table, so just wanted to mention that.
Good, thank you. Any further discussion? Council Lady Weissman.
Yeah, I have a question for Mr. Molman. So if it is truly 2 years to spend the money that is in the drug forfeiture fund, and we haven't spent any money for the last 2 years from that, where I guess the police haven't spent any money for the last 2 years, what sort of oversight do they have, or do we have, to make sure that, and you may not have this answer until next meeting, but what sort of oversight is there to make sure that those funds are getting spent on time and on police vehicles or police dog or whatever it is? And it is okay to answer on Thursday, I'm just sort of prepping you for that.
Sure. So I haven't been able to find the specific regulation that says what happens if you don't do that. There are requirements that this information be provided as part of an annual audit, and it is included within our annual audit. And so there is a mechanism for Department of Justice and Treasury to have this information, essentially what that fund looks like. But I haven't been able to spot anything that says if you don't do this, then this is what happens. So I would need to take a little further look as to exactly what those parameters are.
Thank you. And just to add, we did look at this line item this afternoon, and the last time that there was some money spent out of it was in 2015, and it was for in-car video cameras for about $85,000.
Thank you. I think I don't see any discussion to the left and right, so it appears that we're prepared. Councilman Fitzwater.
Can you restate the motion that's on the floor?
I certainly can. By the clerk shall at this time have the motion stated.
The motion is to fund 6 police vehicles by an offset of sales tax G, specifically referencing the line item of police renovations and upgrades.
Thank you. Okay. Since we're prepared to vote on that, so therefore we'll just go with a roll call on this.
Graham?
Aye.
Hensley?
Aye.
Hussey?
Aye.
Kimna?
Aye.
Mahalovich?
Aye.
Prather?
Aye.
Schreiber?
Aye.
Ward?
Aye.
Wiseman?
No.
Fitzwater?
Aye.
Okay. Motion carries. we have item 21 on the list. Do we have a motion to keep that item on the floor? A motion to 21? It'd be a one police officer.
I would like to keep it on it, but I know that we, after our discussions tonight, one of the plans that we was going to look at pulling the funds from, we can't do that. So I'd like to keep it on until next Thursday.
Would it be appropriate to do that in the line of a motion to, since it's supposed to come off today, have it put back on?
That's our general rule.
Yeah.
So,
I prefer to follow procedures.
So you need me to form a motion to leave it on?
well, you could propose a offset. It could be, no.
No, just, yeah, that'd be fine.
I'd say, from a standpoint, my chair, I don't see it as a big deal.
Okay.
If I get a nod from you all to just to go ahead and leave it on, I'm going to go ahead and leave it on. Okay, got it.
All right, sounds good.
Thanks for the clarification, though, past chair. Very good. So, we're...
I do have a question, though, for Chief.
Councilman
I guess,
Graham.
Chief Schrader, if you could, for maybe our public safety meeting on Thursday, if you could, I know you're going to provide to us, public safety, those items in which the captains have identified additional things to be funded. And also, if you can find out if possible the motorcycle equipment could come out of the police drug forfeiture funds as well, too. So since we've purchased, I think you said we purchased $80,000 in some type of cameras before, Margie, is that what you said?
The last purchase out of those funds was for $85,000 for in-camera video cameras, in-car video cameras.
Right. So if we can look at that, Chief, and then also for our drug dog that's getting of age.
If I may, I suggest maybe the regulation we see is that governing bodies should not be involved in that.
Gotcha.
So I strongly suggest we not discuss those things.
Okay. So if that's the case, that was just something that a decision that you would make?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So if we shouldn't make that, then I'll pull my statement off the floor, I guess.
I would also offer the list of vehicles and their mileage, and I'll bring that to the committee meeting also, if you wish.
Okay, thank you. And then, like I said, on Thursday, we can discuss the police officer and how we get to that. So,
Okay. We're going to leave it on. Is there any items? Council Lady Weissman.
Just one last question. How are we supposed to make sure we comply with federal regulations for the police drug forfeiture fund by making sure it's spent if we can't talk about it?
Well, it's in the context of how it's spent cannot be directed by the governing body. Now, certainly you have access to the records, and we have an annual audit. And that's why I'm not as concerned maybe as some, on the expenditure of that, because we've had this fund for decades with an annual audit without any concerns ever expressed. So that's what I know.
Counselor.
I just want to add some clarification. The chief is right. The guidance from Department of Treasury does say, and I'm quoting here, that they cannot, if the governing body, this tells you what you can't do. If the governing body or state or local law, regulation, or policy requires or directs specific expenditures of shared funds, and then some other things that really don't apply here. So what I think the federal regulations say is that you cannot direct the chief to say, you have to spend this on motorcycles. But I don't think that it precludes the city council from having conversations about possible uses and what could be funded out of those federal funds. I don't think it precludes a conversation and an open dialogue, but what it does preclude is saying, okay, that's a great idea, Councilman X, Chief, you have to do this. Essentially, the chief has to agree that that is appropriate use of the funds.
But if it's above that threshold, does it still have to be approved by someone, by the administrator or the city council if it's above this threshold?
Yeah, I don't think that the federal regulations
Would say
replace council authority to approve contracts.
Okay.
It's just that as part of the process, you can't direct him to expend the funds in any particular way.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes any difference, but I wouldn't expend anything unless I conferred with Mr. Kroll. I mean, I don't unilaterally enter into those kinds of decisions or embrace others also. That's not what happens.
Right.
No, sir.
And I didn't think so. I was just asking the question because we was talking about the piece that we can't direct you to, spend those funds in a certain way. I was just asking about the other side of the process as relates to being approved. So that's all it was.
Okay. Can you provide us with an update on health costs, and is there going to be some refinement of those things within the budget, do you anticipate?
We had a meeting today we've had several meetings, but we had the most recent meeting today with the broker, and we have another one on Wednesday or Thursday? Wednesday. They're finalizing some information that we needed. So there's a range of possibilities, one of which is the money that has been proposed would be sufficient, but the risk is a little bit higher, and we can talk a little bit about that risk being related to expenditure, experience. And the other is increasing some rates and premiums and what impact that may have. So the timing is just doesn't work out very well, but we hope to have that for Thursday.
Very good. Any directives?
I'm sorry. Gail, anything to add to that, wherever you went?
No, I think that's everything.
All right, sorry.
Any directives to staff for, Mayor, do you have any closing comments?
Thank you.
Very good. Our next meeting will be August the 29th, 5:30 in these chambers. Councilman Weissman. Later. Okay. Second. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? We stand adjourned.